I was thinking of the subject of this conference just a week or so ago, talking to my son Matt, who is a freelance news photographer who'd been at the Cannes Film Festival, and he spent 2 weeks there, and how it had been, and he talked about he had a PA Press Association ticket, he had a good spot, but you had to protect his spot, you had to find out what's going on. And I said, so how did it all go? And he said, well, fortunately, he said, and because I speak French and Italian, I was able to find out from the French and Italian photographers where things were happening. I was able to talk my way into events which the other British photographers couldn't get into, and it was great. And the other British photographers were left sort of wondering where I was going. And I thought, that's fantastic, because he developed his French because we lived in Lyon for a year when he was in his early teens. He learned Italian because he studied art history at Warwick and spent a term in Venice. And to my pleasure and our pleasure, he's kept those languages going ever since. And it was a very simple example of how language and cultural familiarity make a huge difference to people. And it's that, I think, which has made business leaders change their views on languages in the last 5 or so years. They used to say it doesn't matter, all business is done in English, which is a lot of the time true, that all business is done in English. What they now realise is not true is that it doesn't matter for that reason. They know that languages give you something different from business negotiations, and give you something different as you integrate yourself into business negotiations. It gives you cultural insight, gives you personal engagement, and gives you, therefore, a degree of credibility. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why business leaders have started turning much more, speaking up much more about the importance of modern languages. But we know that education in languages are about so much more than just facility at speaking it, as is the research that underpins it all. That's only well understood in the context of how individual people develop. So for me, I was a very British historian who worked only on British history. I chose as a young lecturer to move from my first post at Hull to Essex, not to escape the vigour of Humberside for the wastelands of Essex, but because Essex was a comparative history department, and I wanted to be stretched into new countries and new ways of thinking. And that led to increasing engagement with other European social historians, engagement in European research groups, an invitation to spend a year teaching at Lyon 2, and doing so in French, which for a historian of Britain was a transformative challenge. When I'm pleased to say I did get through. And more immersion into European research networks and perspectives. Academics, of course, find their own drivers to work in other languages. There's always that drive for academics. My point is that is not unusual. Languages open up new options for people in all social groups and occupations, and we've met people in that situation who happen to have spent a year abroad and whose life has been changed by that simple familiarity and comfort in another culture and another language, whatever their occupation and background. In terms of policy, of course, the issues are far more complex. There are clearly challenges for modern languages in the UK today. Challenges of student demand, rooted in misguided policies in relation to school-level curriculum, and of course also rooted in aspects of British culture. But there are also challenges of higher education policy. Not so much that policymakers don't care about languages, because I think they do, but it's about what it is that they care about that might be the problem, and I'll return to that in a moment. But we need to ask, is the languages problem part of a broader problem facing the humanities? I think only to an extent, and probably a small extent. There's no problem about recruiting students to the wide range of humanities subjects. And my own view is that's actually not going to change very much under the new fees regime, certainly not for the old research-intensive part of the university sector. The wider challenge facing humanities is also not about funding. There's no more teaching funding being taken from humanities than is being taken from science. Arts and humanities research funding is not being cut any more than STEM research funding is being cut. Though it's true that if science subjects get more direct funding for teaching because they're more expensive, and it looks as though they will, though how much they will get is reducing all the time as the cost of the loan book eats its way into hefty money. But if STEM subjects get some direct funding, for teaching because they're more expensive, then why not modern languages? Why not creative and performing arts? Both of which areas are in a higher price group today. Nevertheless, I think that the key issue facing the humanities is not funding. It's the concept of strategic priorities that is there in the Brown Report and in much other discourse that aligns strategic priorities with STEM. We need to counter that, not in the way in which many people in the arts and humanities have done over recent months, by acting as victims, because people only pity victims, they don't celebrate them. Instead, we should celebrate why the humanities disciplines matter and why they make a difference. Now, I don't think there's a problem about the credibility of languages in the wider discourse. The problem is what people mean by the importance of languages. The political and policy agenda seems to me to have become very confused. Is the issue one of learning a language while at university? Well, this is growing as an add-on to other programs. More and more universities are offering languages, modern languages, as an add-on to other programs. That's wonderful and it's important. But does that relegate to a secondary level powerful issues about an in-depth education in language, an in-depth education in a culture of other peoples and other countries? What I said in the early part of my welcome indicates that I certainly think we need the former, the familiarity with one or more other languages. While my own experience as a humanities researcher and as a former chief executive of the Arts and Humanities Research Board makes me convinced we need that latter, the in-depth as well. And that necessarily means research. And here too we need to be clear to policymakers about what this means. Is it research into other cultures that is rooted in language ability? Is it research into linguistics of other languages? Is it research in applied linguistics that helps language acquisition? And to these I add the need for language capacity to do research in other disciplines. If the political scientists, jurists, ethnographers aren't equipped with languages, then we won't get research on countries other than the UK on the scale that's needed. And there's already a crisis at PhD level in many subjects where people work on the Anglophone world. But there's also, and this is my last point, policy confusion over which languages matter. And this is where STIDs come in, HEFTI's programme of support for strategically important and vulnerable subjects. And some version of this will appear in the new funding system. David Willits, every time he's thrown a problem about funding, sends it to HEFTI, and HEFTI will address this, often through strategically important and vulnerable subjects. But there'll be very little money and choices will have to be made. Languages are clearly vulnerable. But what is it about languages that is strategic? Language acquisition, language culture, what? And which languages are strategically important? Other European languages are losing out in the policy debate, I think. Mandarin, Japanese and so on are presented at one level for the future, as if cultural alienation from our European roots wouldn't do great damage to Britain. But there's another policy imperative, and that's minority languages and cultures that explode unexpectedly into prominence and where capacity is needed. The languages of South Yemen today, the languages of South Ossetia just a few years ago. David Willits always likes to cite the kidnap of somebody in a part of North Africa where, if you're going to negotiate with kidnappers, you need a quite precise and little-known regional language, and that there's someone at SOAS or there's someone else in the UK who happens to know that language because that's what they specialise in and how important it is we have those. Now, all of those seem to me very valid reasons for deciding that modern languages are strategically important. There's much confusion about what the strategic means in strategic and vulnerable, and many different answers. And I think we need to clarify some of those issues, rather than just wringing our hands about the fate of modern languages. I could say more, but I should stop. You want to get the conference itself underway. Nemi Siegel asked me if I would welcome you all as Vice-Chancellor of the University of London, but you can tell this is something I care a lot about, and so I couldn't just welcome you. Nonetheless, I'll do as I'm told. On behalf of the University of London, a warm welcome to you all, and I hope you have a very productive conference. Thank you.